Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. This is actually, I think, a wonderful turnout for a cold Monday night in January. But it's an honor to be here with all of you because this is really what democracy, what representative democracy should be all about. And fundamentally, my job is to be your representative in Washington. My team and I work for you, not the other way around. And I don't think I can do my job very well if I don't hear from you, if I don't meet you, if I don't go out and understand what your issues are, what your views are, what your compliments are, what your complaints are. What are the things you think we need to be doing differently or better? What are the things that you like and want to see more of? So that's what we're here to do tonight. Usually, I start these town halls by going through a lot of the local issues that my office is working on. Usually, when you hear me on the radio or see me on TV, it's with something to do with the international scene. I've been on, talking about Iran a lot lately, but it's often local issues that people don't know about that our office works on every single day. I won't even introduce all our teammates here. We work on constituent issues, people who are not getting their Social Security check is late. We solve problems like that on a daily basis, and we work very closely with cities and towns, the 39 that I represent, to get grants, to navigate federal programs, to make sure that rivers get dredged and that toxic dumps get cleaned up. Things like that happen every single day. But the elephant in the room, I think, for the entire country right now is, in fact, Iran. And so I want to start by addressing that this evening. I fought against Iranian operatives on the ground in Iraq. There aren't many people in politics who can say that today. I get the fact that there are people in Iran, like Qasem Soleimani, who have American blood on their hands. And trust me, I'm not mourning his death. But I think that what the president did in authorizing this strike with clearly no plan for what comes next was a massive strategic blunder that has made us less safe tonight as we sit here and has left the national security picture going forward highly uncertain. News is breaking literally every hour on this. There are different reports out this evening about a possible complete pullout from Iraq. This is just a month or so after the president said we're withdrawing our troops from Syria and putting them in Iraq so that they can continue to fight ISIS, but they won't be in Syria. Apparently that plan might well be out the window. Iran has promised to retaliate. Look, there aren't many things that I trust Iran with, but this I actually do trust, that they will in fact retaliate against Americans, whether overseas or here at home. You can bet that they are plotting right now how to do that. And at the end of the day, as we potentially get drawn into another war in the Middle East, exactly the kind of endless war that the president promised to end, it takes our eye off the ball with other national security challenges that are actually much greater. One thing you have not heard anybody talk about as tensions escalate with Iran is China, for example. And yet our national defense strategy, which is supported broadly by Democrats and Republicans across the country and in Washington, D.C., the national defense strategy clearly says that the number one national security threat, and by the way, the number one economic security threat to the United States is China. But if we get bogged down in another war in the Middle East that will make the Iraq war look like a cakewalk, we're missing the big picture and the bigger threats that we face across the globe. So there's the strategic blunder just within the Middle East that I think the president has made here, but there's also the much broader strategic blunder for the long-term health and security of our country. It remains to be seen what will come of this and what will happen next. I've privately heard that a lot of Pentagon officials in the military are completely aghast that the president made this decision. President Bush, President Obama could have taken out Qasem Soleimani as well, but one of the basic tenets of counterinsurgency strategy that you learn is you never want to create more terrorists than you kill. This particular situation reminds me of a place I was in in Najaf in 2005, a city in southern Iraq, that at the time was really run by a militia. And they had an Iranian proxy governor in charge of the whole situation. Now, this guy was dirty. Everybody hated him. And we absolutely knew that he was out to kill Americans. Trust me, I would have loved to kill this guy. But we made a strategic decision not to do so because we knew that doing so would create a bigger problem than it solved. That math wouldn't work out. General McChrystal has often used the example of, you have 10 terrorists, you kill 3, how many do you have left? Well, a lot of people think 10 minus 3 is 7, but in this business, a lot of times, 10 minus 3 plus 10, because those 3 were father, brother, son, to other people who actually believed in what they were doing and then have signed up as a result. So there is a place and a role for combating terrorism, for killing extremists in the Middle East, to protect Americans here at home. I've taken part in that myself. But we cannot be stupid about how we go about it. My best judgment of the president's decision tonight is that it was a very stupid decision to make. So I want to be very upfront about addressing that. Now look, you're still welcome to ask questions about it. Happy to hear if you disagree. But I did want to address that because I know it's on the minds of a lot of Americans tonight. This happened a few nights ago. I immediately was texted by a number of fellow veterans that I served with in Iraq, some of whom, like myself, had directly or indirectly fought Iranians on the ground. 100% of the texts did not say, "Hooray, we killed this guy." Every single one of them said, "What the heck is going on? Do we have a plan?" And sadly, I cannot say with any confidence whatsoever that we do have a plan, that this has been thought through, that the administration knows what's happening next or what the actual strategy will be. So that's where we are tonight. And the next morning, after that happened, and I got the text, the next morning I called the mother of a friend, because my friend's in the Marines. And I said, I know this must be a tough day to be the mother of a Marine, worried that your son might get drawn into another war in the Middle East. A war that, if Iraq is any guide, I've got to worry about my daughter serving in, and she's 14 months old. Think about that. But you should know that there are a lot of people in Washington on both sides of the aisle who want to make sure we're smart about how we go forward here. And when I go down to Washington tomorrow, I'm sure that I will spend as a member of the Armed Services Committee a good deal of time not just talking about this in public, but talking about it in private, in classified setting with officials in the Department of Defense to try to figure a way out of the hole we're in right now. Okay, so we can talk more about that. You can talk about anything on your mind, local issues, national issues. If you would just do us the favor of introducing yourself, saying where you're from. You don't need to be from Groveland or Merrimack or West Newbury to be here tonight, but just give us that background, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. So thanks. Oh, one more detail. So you see Nisha up there with a microphone and Hannah over here. They are the people who are delivering the microphones for questions. So it's a great system because if you don't get called, you don't blame me. But try to get their attention. And Nisha will start with you.
Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening, sir.
2 questions about impeachment.
Where are you from?
Newburyport. My name is Charles Card.
Thanks, John.
It's not too early to ask questions about impeachment?
Not too early, not too late.
Okay. 2 questions. Why did the House Dems decide to drop a subpoena against ex-Bolton aide Charles Cooperman when the courts probably would have decided in their favor, and Trump officials would have been forced to obey the subpoenas? understand the logic of that. Second question is, why did they not subpoena John Bolton? Because today John Bolton said he would testify in the Senate if given a subpoena.
I think those are two excellent questions, and one of the values that we have posted in our office when you walk in the door is transparency. I'll be very transparent with you. I don't know the full rationale here. There are people who are in charge of kind of managing this impeachment process. I'm not on one of the impeachment committees, but they decided that the best case to be made was to sort of close the books and move forward, and that's the decision that they made. It's not really my place to dispute that insofar as they know more about this case than I do. I don't sit on those committees. I sit on the Armed Services Committee and the Budget Committee. We've been very hard at work dealing with a whole bunch of other problems like we were just discussing. But I don't honestly know the answer to your question for why we didn't pursue those subpoenas. But thanks for asking. Sorry, I don't know more satisfying answer.
Yeah, Stephen Marlowe, Boxford.
Thanks for coming.
Without trying to sound too cynical,
Sure. That's hard.
do you think that this thing with Iran was done to change the news cycle away from impeachment?
Well, look, I don't know. There's no sort of direct evidence that that's the case. I don't think right now. I do know that the president tweets a lot and seems to communicate largely by tweet. I've never seen him tweet anything strategically sensible about going to war with Iran or containing Iran. I have heard him tweet a lot about starting a war with Iran in order to distract from domestic political issues, because he repeatedly accused President Obama of doing this throughout his presidency, or threatening to do this rather. Obviously, Obama never did start a war with Iran, but President Trump repeatedly, in response to actions that President Obama took, said it was probably trying to start a war with Iran to distract from his domestic political problems. So this is obviously a strategy the president is well familiar with. And I think I should leave it at that.
Hi, Mike
Hi.
Sidwell from Groveland. Thank you for coming.
Great, thank you.
Question, get off of politics. Taxes.
Yes.
Healthcare taxes. I spend $13,000 a year in premiums. That money is taxed. When I worked for the town of Ipswich for 30 years, they did not tax my premiums. I had a flexible spending account.
Okay.
I'm between 55 and 65, I'm being taxed. I've contacted your office. They sent me a copy of the tax law. I sent an email back that said, I know what the tax laws are. Something should be done.
Mm-hmm.
Then I wrote you a handwritten letter. I don't know if you ever got it. I got an email back with a form letter. Why are we paying taxes on healthcare money? Premiums.
Well,
at least one thing. Everything else,
sure.
You know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely, and I think that a lot of people are frustrated with the tax system, and a lot of people have different views on what should be taxed and what shouldn't. And there are a lot of disagreements with the most recent tax bill, which was really this big tax cut that was pushed through by the administration. But the bottom line is that look, I sit on the budget committee. Sometimes I'm reticent to admit that because we don't do a very good job of balancing the budget right now. But the fact of the matter is that we have the largest deficit in American history. So I don't think there's anyone in the room who wouldn't raise their hand if I said, would you be happier if we lowered taxes? Of course, everyone wants lower taxes. But there's a certain extent to which we're just all in this boat together, and we got to figure out how to pay the bills that are coming due, or else we're just committing intergenerational theft and throwing that on our kids. So I think you raise an interesting point.
Well, there are people that aren't being taxed. Then there are people that are. They're in the same situation. They're paying healthcare premiums. Why are they being taxed? Why are some? There are a lot of people in my situation who are in that before they're 65.
Right. Well, there's donut hole issues. Well, I mean, look, I'm not a tax law expert.
Right.
And I don't remember what the exact provenance of this particular, what bills or legislation led to this particular situation.
Right.
But I just, I think it's really important to point out in these situations where, this is something people bring up a lot, this tax or that tax, it seems unfair. But we can't just go around cutting taxes when you have the largest deficit in American history without doing something to make up for it. And that's the challenge that we all have. So I may not disagree with you that this particular tax is unfair,
Right.
but we as a community and as a country have to figure out some way to actually close this deficit, or else we're just passing it off to our kids and our grandkids, and all those Cub Scouts over there are going to have to foot the bill.
I
And
understand.
I don't think that's fair. So I'm not
What's
disagreeing
good
with
for
you.
one should be good for the others.
I'm not
Are
disagreeing
you
with
gonna work on this? Can you help with this?
let me.
I'm not gonna see this benefit, other people will.
Yeah. So look, it's absolutely something that we can look into, and we can, and it's something that because you've raised it, I'll be cognizant of when I vote on the next tax bill. But one of the interesting parts of this job is you have people who come in all the time, office in DC or office in Salem, and raise issues like this, or very often they're spending issues. We need to invest more in this. We need to invest more in infrastructure. We need to invest more in infectious disease research. I have a daughter with this terrible disease. Why can't we spend more money to
Right.
investigate it? And do you know how many people have come into my office in the 5 years I've had this job and said, by the way, I have an idea for how to raise revenue to pay for these things? You still have the opportunity to be the first one. Right?
Just keep in mind,
And that's a challenge.
the
That's a
government
challenge we all have.
requires me to have health care. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Why should I pay tax on that money?
Well, the point is that the money's got to come from somewhere. And we can agree on whether or not this issue is fair, but we
Just keep
can't
it in the back of
solve
your
this
head.
problem until we come up with alternatives for the taxes that we want to cut.
Okay, thank
But
you.
thank you very much.
I gotta go to work.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks for coming.
Hi, thanks for coming here tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Richard Tomczyk from Boxford, Mass. I'd like to ask some questions relating to your opening remarks and maybe related to what this last gentleman just spoke about. So I went online and checked out some things. In terms of military spending, the United States spends around $649 billion a year. The next closest is China, almost a third of that, $250 million.
Good.
You go down, you have to go all the way down to Japan, which is the ninth one. So the next 8 in a row barely adds up to the United States spending in the military. One solution might be to cut the military budget somewhat. 10%, that might take care of some of the taxes. And then other things related to all of this is, what are we doing helping Saudi Arabia with Yemen? What's going on there?
Sure. Well, those are 2 questions, so let me address both of them. And thank you for raising them. I mean, first of all, with regards to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, I have been very outspoken about the fact that we should not be supporting this war in Yemen. And I voted to curtail it several times in the Congress. I'm happy to get you all the details on those votes and post them on my website. But this is a place where we did not have a congressional debate, as is required by the Constitution, about getting involved in this war. And there are a lot of innocent people being killed, and I don't think it's responsible for us to be supporting it. I'll give you a more specific example where this really hits close to home. There's a business in Massachusetts in our district that manufactured some of the munitions used by Saudi Arabia in this war. And look, this is a very good company, and these are the best munitions of this type made in the world. They're as safe as they can be, but Saudi Arabia was misusing them. And I was approached about joining a piece of legislation to outlaw these munitions. And I was advised, Seth, if you sign on to this bill, 400 people are going to lose their jobs in your district. That's not a politically popular thing to do. Most people in my position wouldn't do it. But I signed on to that, even though I knew it would hurt me politically back home, because people would be out of work, because it was the right thing to do morally for our country. So I'm not afraid to take a tough vote on this, and I have in the past. With regards to the military budget, I'm actually the co-chairman of a new task force on the future of defense. And the reason why we're taking this up, which is the first time in a long time that the House Armed Services Committee has looked at our national security needs, not from an annual perspective, but from a 30-year perspective, is because I think we're wasting a lot of money on old weapon systems that are out of date. Your suggestion, your idea, or just the idea that you brought up of cutting the military budget by 1%, sure, that would save a lot of money, but that's not a smart way to cut the military budget. You don't want to just sort of across the board cut. What you want to do is cut the things that aren't working and invest in the things that are. And I think that right now, our Department of Defense, largely as a result of Congress, not because of dumb generals. Generals are pretty smart in my experience, but Congress is often mandating investing in old, expensive weapon systems because they're jobs for people in their congressional districts, rather than making the smart investments in the future technologies that, by the way, Russia and China are investing in, and that we need to keep ourselves safe. In fact, some of those technologies are a lot cheaper. I'll give you a good example. We have over a dozen aircraft carriers. China is trying to compete with us, but they're not building 20 aircraft carriers to compete with our 14. They're just building anti-carrier missiles that can take ours out. And you can buy about 1,250 anti-carrier missiles for the price of one aircraft carrier. That math is not in our favor. And so we gotta be a lot smarter about how we're spending our dollars, or we will not only waste money, to your point, but we'll also fail to keep America safe against some of our great rivals. So thank you very much for raising those issues. Appreciate it.
Hi, Justin from Goldman. Another topic, climate change.
Yep.
With the wildfires going all over in Australia and California year round, what is the proponent that you're going to do to secure a water source? Because a couple of years ago, we had a drought up here where they had mandated water issues. What do you need to do? Because that would be the next resource war, would be the water, because there's not enough fresh, it's all salt. What is your solution to secure a water source for either our area or the country to provide drinking water and all that? Because especially with Flint having lead in theirs.
So this is an important question, because really there already have been wars over water. In fact, a lot of people believe that the massive civil war in Syria would never have happened if not for the huge drought that preceded that conflict. And just having spent a lot of time in Iraq, I know that there is huge regional conflict over the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates River, because Iraq wants it, but Turkey wants it too. And this has led to huge regional tensions, and absolutely lives being lost as a result of this. So it's already happening today. And of course, we all know that the climate scientists predicted that before we just simply saw average temperatures rise, weather would get erratic. And one of the byproducts of this is that certain regions of the country and the world have massive droughts, and then they get a ton of rain, but it's erratic. The weather is not as predictable as it once was, and it makes doing things like simply ensuring a safe, reliable supply of drinking water more difficult. Now, the issue in Flint is not really a climate change issue, which is out-of-date infrastructure that we didn't invest in and keep up to date. And kids are getting sick as a result of it. And that's shameful, and it should never happen in America. There should be nowhere in America where you have to be scared of what comes out of your tap when you open your faucet. I mean, we should be well beyond that now in the richest country in the world. It spends as much as we do on things like our national security. So, of course, I support investing in infrastructure. In fact, just preceding this town hall, we were talking with some of your local leaders here, and one of the big issues that was brought up, I think the first issue that they brought up to me was combined sewage overflows into the Merrimack River. I know it's on the minds of a lot of people, and the reason that's happening is partly due to climate change because of these huge storms that overwhelm the system, but fundamentally it's because we just simply haven't invested in the infrastructure to keep clean water and to clean up the sewage before it gets dumped in the river. So we have a lot of work to do on this. There's the climate change aspect that's already leading the conflicts, but there's also just right here at home making sure that we've upgraded our infrastructure to deal with it. Thank you.
Evening, Congressman. My name is Elliot Zaitsev. I'm from West Neighborhood.
Thanks for
I have
coming.
Thanks. Quick question now that we're talking about Iran, more of a step back to our longest war, which would be Afghanistan. And,
Yeah.
you know, we've listened to military leadership for the past 18 years, and it seems like we've turned enough corners to walk a few circles at this point in time. We're operating under a 2002 AUMF. So I guess from my point of view, I'd like to know from you, A, what does victory look like, and what is our actual mission there at this point in time?
Well, that's a very good question, because as an American citizen, you know, how old are you?
33.
So you might not be, a few years ago, as an American citizen, you might be actually called to go to war if it got that bad. You at least ought to know why we're fighting. And not only this administration, but to be fair, a few administrations have not been able to clearly articulate what our plan is for Afghanistan and what the end game is. You know, one of the things about being in Iraq was not a popular war. I get that. Iraq is a war that probably should never have happened. But at least when I was on the ground in Iraq, I basically knew the plan here. Like, we were supporting the Iraqi government to get them stood up and successful enough that we could leave and go home. And there were different ideas out there at first. Some people wanted to divide up the country into 3 parts. Other people wanted to do different things. We coalesced around the plan to have a unified government of Iraq, the GOI we used to call it, and we knew that if we got that government stable enough, we could go home. I don't think the troops in Afghanistan today, certainly not the troops in Syria, I don't think the troops in Afghanistan today know what they really need to do in order to go home. We haven't really thought that through. Because you don't know, and I'm a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and I don't know. And this is something I have repeatedly pressed the administration on. What I personally think should be our mission in Afghanistan is simply a counter-terror mission. Is there a threat that terrorist training camps in Afghanistan today could lead to an attack in the United States? Yes, there is. We may not like to admit it, but that threat still exists, and I think that's a threat that we should contain. But we could do it with a very small force in Afghanistan that's not focused on building schools or building the Afghan government, but just focused on taking out terrorists if they threaten the United States of America. Now, some people are disappointed in this because they don't want to see Afghan girls who finally have the first chance to go to school in their lives abandoned. And that's a very legitimate position. I just don't think there's a political will in the United States to actually execute that much bigger mission. But I do think we have a national security concern there that we need to continue to address. So if I were president, that didn't work out this time around. But if I were president, that's what I would do. And I would also present that to Congress and say, by the way, you have a constitutionally mandated responsibility to have this debate and have it before the American people, and to give me as the commander-in-chief the authorization to carry out that mission. So we can all be on the same page, or at least we know how we got there. Maybe not everyone votes for it, but the majority of the Congress says, yes, we authorize you for that particular mission, and that's what you're gonna do. And we know that if we get to a point where we're confident there won't be more terrorist training camps in Afghanistan, then we can pull out of it. And by the way, that has been achieved in some other places where we've had counter-terror operations around the globe. You know, we don't have a lot of troops in Colombia anymore because we've been relatively successful at addressing that narco-terror threat. So troops have been able to come home. So that's my answer to your question. But obviously we haven't had that answer from the administration. And it's one of the big concerns I have with them going on, you know, doing things like they did a few nights ago without any big strategic plan. Let me extend this to Iran for a second. The administration does in fact have a policy with regards to Iran. They've done 2 big things. They've pulled out of the nuclear deal and they've instituted a maximum pressure campaign. And they've been very explicit about what their goals are. There are 3 goals: reducing or deterring regional aggression, number 2, stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program, and number 3, bringing Iran back to the negotiating table. Now, I think it was a strategic blunder, and most military officers agree, to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, but I don't fundamentally disagree with those 3 policy goals. We do need to deter regional aggression, we do need to stop the nuclear weapons program, and we should get them to the negotiating table. But here's the problem. This is the administration's policy. And on every single count, they have failed. By their own measure, by their own goals, they have failed. Because they have not deterred regional aggression, they've encouraged it. And Iran is much more aggressive regionally than they were a few years ago. On number two, they haven't stopped Iran's nuclear program, they've restarted it. And the news out today is that Iran is completely restarting their nuclear program. And on number three, I don't think Iran has ever been farther from the negotiating table in my entire life than they are now. So even if you just take the administration at its word, and you say, okay, fine, I'll agree with your Iran policy, it's been a complete abject failure. And I asked the Secretary of Defense about this in an open hearing before the Armed Services Committee in December, and he wasn't able to give an answer, because of course, I mean, this is your policy, and you're failing by your own measures. So when I say that there's a real lack of strategy here, a lack of planning for what happens next, or what the big picture strategy is with this stuff that we're doing in the Middle East, and this is the basis of my concern. Even by their own metrics, they're failing. Thanks for your question.
Hi, my name's Doreen Bleeds.
Hi.
We've talked in the past. I'm from Groveland. I'm gonna switch it a little bit.
That's all right.
That is, we could go all night. I'm woman-owned small business,
Great.
and thank you. We've been hit hard. Last year with the shutdown of the government,
Mhm.
I have contracts with the FAA, I have contracts with the Coast Guard. I did the work, and it took me longer to get paid. As a small business, that's difficult. The Coast Guard, I do snow plowing for the Coast Guard in Boston. They could only give me purchase orders, and even now, they're only giving me purchase orders for short times where they know they're gonna have the funding. Now, am I gonna stop plowing for the Coast Guard because they've run out of money? No, because they're the Coast Guard.
And you're a good American. Thank you for that.
You know, they're here, so they do a wonderful job. That's difficult. The other piece that's difficult, as a woman-owned small business, and I've got lots of us standing behind me, there's supposed to be at least a 5% goal across all federal agencies that they're spending with women-owned small businesses. They're not doing it. There's no compliance, they're not making sure that they even go there. Even their prime contractors are not meeting their goals. We need more compliance. 5% is tiny. That's a really, Massachusetts is having a problem in itself with that too. But I wanna see some more compliance, more pushback to those agencies. I think Department of Energy, they only did 1%. You know, there needs to be some compliance and some strong arming, basically, to push. We're 51% of the population.
Yeah, and the smarter part too. The smart half as well.
Exactly.
That's the statistics. Look, first of all, thank you for being a leader in business. I'm married to a successful businesswoman, a working mom, and traveling working mom, and she works hard every day. And I'll tell you that it's frankly harder for her to do her job as a woman than it would be as a man, just because of inherent sexism that still exists in our society and certainly exists in the business world. So to simply do what you're doing and be successful is harder than for those of us guys in the room, and I have a lot of respect for that. So thank you for your leadership. And thank you for being a great American patriot and still snow plowing for the Coast Guard even when they don't pay you. It's shameful and embarrassing that the Coast Guard can't pay you. It doesn't make me proud to hear that story and stand here as a member of Congress. We're better than that. We need to be better than that. When we get to the point where we can't even talk enough in Congress to simply keep the government open, we've got real problems. In this very divided political time, a lot of times people will say, you know, Seth, people are tired of bipartisanship, don't talk about that. I'm proud to have, you know, the most bipartisan record in Massachusetts for just getting things done. Because sometimes you need to work with people across the aisle to get things done, and funding the government is one of those things. So I've taken some tough votes in the past to fund the government when it wasn't everything that I wanted in that bill. You know, I had to make some compromises. But the very least we should be able to do is keep the lights on for American citizens. And your story is a great example of why that's important. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, Congressman. Well, you know, my head is just spinning. There are so many things I would like to talk to you about. But I guess the one thing I wanted to talk about was, or ask you about, is you stand there, you say very supportive things that I think most all of the room would agree with. I believe what you're saying to me as well, and to us. But we don't see anything happening.
Yeah.
And I can't put it all on you, you're one voice. So what I wanted to ask was, when you go back to Washington, you speak with your colleagues on Republicans as well as the Democrats, and they're having these sort of town halls and they're getting feedback from their constituents. Are they saying to you, we're hearing the exact same thing? Is there some true consensus where you and your colleagues as a larger group can somehow have more influence, more of an impact to actually do some things for everybody?
Well, let me answer your question by saying this. You know, I just got elected 5 years ago, so I haven't been doing this job for all that long. And when I came to Washington, I said, you know, I think we got to make some changes here in Congress. And there are a lot of veteran members of Congress, all of them older than me, who said, you know, simmer down there, young whippersnapper. We're doing just fine. And who are you to come in and say we ought to change the way we do business? I mean, when we set up our office, it just looked different. I mean, we had a problem with a constituent early on in our Salem office because, I mean, it's an unfortunate story, but he was sort of yelling at the intern at the front desk because she wouldn't let him charge his iPhone. He thought it was an Apple store. It just looks a little bit more up to date than your average congressional office, and I'm very proud of that. But the fact of the matter is that if I had just joined a high-performing organization, it would be pretty arrogant for me as a newcomer to say we got to change how we're doing business. But I think there's a lot of consensus in America that Congress right now is not a high-performing organization. And so I thought it would be pretty naive to come into Congress and just say, okay, well, let's do everything the way that it's been done for a long time. So one of the things that I'm trying to do as a member of Congress is not just do my job and represent you and vote the way I believe, but also try to actually change the institution. I've done a couple things on that front. One is I was a part of a committee last year on recommending changes to simply the way the House of Representatives operates. This is archaic stuff, but it's really important to make sure that we can actually be more productive. Not everything works the same way as it did in 1776, and sometimes you got to update things, but we haven't done that in a while. The other thing I've been doing on the more political side, which we can't get into detail tonight, is just getting better leaders elected to Congress. And that's something that on the political side of things I've been working very hard on, and we were very successful in 2018. I have an organization called Serve America that backed a number of candidates, mostly veterans. Just to give you one example of the work that they've done, it was 6 veterans who wrote an op-ed to the Washington Post that essentially changed the party's position on impeachment and decided, you know, after that came out, like literally that afternoon, leadership decided to go forward with the case, and every one of those was a candidate that I worked hard to get elected. So we are trying to change the institution by changing some of the leadership. We're also trying to change the institution by simply changing some of the ways that Congress operates. But obviously, we haven't been terribly successful yet in aggregate because Congress is still pretty broken. But I will tell you that there are some new members of Congress. People like Alyssa Slotkin was in the news recently for having a pretty contentious town hall. She would be thrilled with this tonight. Very, 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 very polite and intellectually engaging and everything. She had a very contentious town hall in Michigan recently. But she won a tough race and a tough seat, and she gets tough questions, and that's okay. She's someone who's she's a tough woman, and she used to work in the Department of Defense, and she is up there working hard every day for her constituents, but also for these problems. In fact, she is leading the bill on the joint war powers resolution that we're going to vote on this week with regards to the situation in Iran. So there is a new generation of leaders who are coming to Congress that are making a difference. We haven't elected enough of them yet to totally change the institution. But those are some of the things that I'm trying to do to actually make Congress work better, besides simply doing a good job for you. Thanks. Do you want to ask a question right down here in front?
I was just gonna say something, but, all right. I was just gonna ask you about term limits, so you said you've been.
Oh,
working-
term limits.
Well, so you said you've been in 5 years.
Yep.
And I was a teacher here in this school, and I would say it took 3 years before you felt like you really were humming. So I imagine it takes probably 5 years to feel like you're really humming down in DC. If you had term limits, what would you limit them at? What do you think?
So the question for those of you who can't hear is about term limits. First of all, so you know, I am supportive of term limits. I don't think that it's a solution to everything, but given the options we have, given this question, would Congress work better with term limits or without? I think term limits would probably help. But you're right that you don't want to make it too short, because if I quit after 2 years, yeah, you're right. We're just kind of figuring things out. I'm actually a part of a term limits caucus. It's bipartisan, and we're working on this. I just had a meeting with a Republican colleague who I actually happens to be a fellow Marine veteran, just the week before Christmas, about this. And we're trying to settle on what that right number should be. But I think it's somewhere in the range of maybe 12 years in Congress or something like that. And then it's time for someone else to come in. And that you're not just going to try to get reelected to have a lifetime appointment. You're trying to do a good job for your constituents in the amount of service that you have there. And by the way, look, this is how it works in the military. You decide to serve your country in the military. You can't do that when you're 80 years old. Sorry, but there's a limit. There's a term limit there. For most people, it's 20 years, but there's also age limits and whatnot. It's not a crazy concept. It's not perfect. There's some 80-year-old members of Congress who were very effective. But overall, would the institution be better if we had new blood coming in on a regular basis? I think it would.
This is the last question.
Okay.
Good evening, Congressman. Thanks
Good
for being
evening,
here. My name is Lee Thomas. I'm from Groveland, and I don't want to sound too dark.
It's tough right now.
I know.
Not too dark.
And the questions that are asked, and the one that I've been thinking of, it all seems to kind of fill a pattern to me. Nancy Pelosi was talking about this the bill to kind of limit things with Iran. What's to stop Mr. Trump from just ignoring that and ignoring not paying this lady back here, ignoring changing the tax, ignoring, he does it all the time anyway. What's to stop him from continuing to ignore it when clearly he's going to stay president, at least for the next year? What's to stop him from doing? I'm really concerned about it.
Well, sir, I wish I could give you some good news here, but I very much share your concern. And I understand that not everybody in America is going to agree on political positions. I don't agree with all my colleagues in Washington. There are a lot of people in my district, in our district right here, that voted for Trump. And of course, there are a lot of people that voted against him. The job that we ought to find when we go to the job that we ought to do when we go to Washington is to find enough common ground to at least get things done, despite our differences, to get things done for all of you. But the thing that concerns me most about this presidency is not the fact that I disagree with Trump on some policy issues, but the fact that he's completely throwing out the institutions and just candidly breaking the law with regards to the Constitution. And that's dangerous in the long run. That's dangerous for the future of our government, not just for whatever policy you support. So you can disagree with the president on a certain policy. And you know what? If a Democratic president is elected next time, we'll probably change some of that stuff. President Trump, for example, has rolled back a lot of environmental regulations that are simply based in science. And if a different president is elected, it doesn't even have to be a Democrat. There are Republicans who believe in science too, and you can get a Republican out there who, let's not forget, Richard Nixon, he wasn't exactly an all-star president, but he started the EPA. right? So we could get a new president who says, I believe in science and we ought to put these regulations back in place. But if the whole institution is broken, where Congress can issue a lawful subpoena, and the administration really for the first time in history just simply says, we're not gonna follow it. You know, you might be a huge Bill Clinton fan, a hardcore Democrat, and think that the whole impeachment trial against him was complete hogwash. He should never have been charged as he was. But at the end of the day, when Bill Clinton was asked to give a blood sample, he did. Trump's told everyone in his administration to simply ignore the will of Congress, and that's a constitutional crisis. So I understand that there are a lot of Americans who support the president. But what ought to come first is supporting the Constitution of the United States. When I was sworn in to Congress, I recited an oath that was word for word the same oath that I gave as a Marine officer. And it's not an oath to my political party, to the Speaker of the House, or the President of the United States. It's an oath to the Constitution, to protect the Constitution. That's the kind of government that we have. I think it's not perfect, but I think it's the best type of government this world has ever seen. And if we want to preserve that type of government, we have to uphold the law. I did not get elected in 2014 to impeach a president. If you told me in 2014 that, 5 years from now you'd have a impeachment vote on Donald Trump, I mean, I would have laughed. Like, Donald Trump being president and voting? What are you talking about? It seems crazy, or it did. And I'm not jumping up and down when I took that vote. But I did it to uphold the oath I swore to defend the Constitution. Not because I like or dislike Donald Trump, but because maintaining the Constitution and the rule of law is a principle that we should all agree with. So I'm sorry that I don't have better news on this, but it is a reminder that elections have consequences. Elections have consequences. And one of the great things about representing this district is that we do have a really engaged electorate. I mean, look at all of you out here. You could have been watching reruns of the Patriots lose, but you came to listen and contributing. And that's really important. I mean, this is what democracy should be about. And so let me just end by thanking you for being participants in our democracy. And, encourage your friends to come. And they don't have to agree. I always respect the Republicans, the Trump supporters and whatnot who come to these town halls, because it's not as fun to come to a town hall with someone, who disagrees with the president on a lot of issues, if you agree with the president. But we need that debate. We need that discussion. And I can't do my job. I wasn't elected to be a representative of just people who vote like me, of just Democrats. I'm a representative for everybody in this district. Republicans, Democrats, independents, people who vote in every election and people who've never voted at all. You guys haven't voted in any election in your lives. But I hope the lesson that you take from tonight is that this stuff matters. And as soon as you turn 18, you gotta sign up for the draft and you ought to vote. And those are responsibilities that I think we all should take seriously. So thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Have a